Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Stanishi of Open Forum, Candid Frank Live. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV Channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS, Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google, Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on smart TVs 2016 forward. Now joining us on Open Forum, Candid Frank and Live, Howard Shore, running for council in Markham, Ontario. How are you doing, Mr. Shore?
I'm doing well, Frank. Thank you for having me this afternoon.
It's totally our pleasure. We love
That
talking.
long intro and all the different stations. I'm surprised you could remember the long list.
Okay, let's go with that. Um, it, you know, it's something that you're doing. You used to be a counselor with Markham. What brought you back?
The from one door to the next right now. The thing that I hear from people, and after living here myself for 30 years, is the overdevelopment that's taking place literally from one end of Markham to from one end of Thornhill to the other, literally from Yonge Street. Yonge and Royal Orchard is where the subway extension, the Young Finch subway extension, is going to be diverging through the local community at the protests of the local community, and in a way that just does not make sense, up to the Langstaff GO station. A proposal for an 80 tower condominium complex at the same intersection, Royal Orchard and Yonge, at the Food Basics Plaza, stretching all the way to Don Mills and John at the Bishop's Cross Plaza, with three condominium towers that are going to be going in there. We're currently a nice little plaza for the community where I get my hair cut. And it's not as if it's one pocket of Thornhill, but again, literally from Yonge Street to Don Mills, these are major intensification projects. I'm not anti-development per se, but development has to be well thought out and planned, and there has to be, to my mind, it's a horse and cart situation. The horse being, you have to have sufficient infrastructure in place beforehand. You have to have the capacity for transit, for the cars that are going to stay on the road no matter what. There are three major projects that are happening right within 400 meters of one another at Bayview and John. Shouldice Hospital being redeveloped, immediately across the street, Thornhill Square, with three towers being put in place there, and the back end of the ladies' golf course with Tridel development. Bayview is already rated as the second busiest artery in York Region as is, let alone all of this new development. How cars are going to move about is beyond me. So the reason, to answer your question, is because of the development, and I think I know it's unprecedented, and I think it's going to have, if we don't slow down the pace of development, it's going to have an adverse impact on the quality of life for people who live in Thornhill. Because how we move about, it isn't just spending a few minutes in traffic on our commute to and from work. It's picking up the kids, or the grandkids. It's going shopping. It's going to the grocery store. It's going to the gym. It's how you move about throughout the day. It's so all encompassing. But I'm sure you got other questions. But that's the nub of why I'm getting into this race, is because I think that I know that if something isn't done now, the look and feel of what I think is I'm prejudiced, but the nicest part of Markham, and certainly the oldest part of Markham, is going to change, and not for the better.
Okay, let's. The question that comes to my mind is: you're suggesting that this kind of, in a way, you're calling it almost overdevelopment, which is moving
Absolutely.
ahead of infrastructure, which is affecting people's personal and work lives, and basically their amusement too, when they just want to go for a drive wherever it is they're going on a weekend or during a week or whenever. What's the motivation though to do all this? And can you, in your thinking, because it's about tax base, right? It's about creating a tax base. Yeah, every city wants to figure out how to make some money so they can spend it, right? How do you replace what this is going to do the way they want to do it that you're not for?
Well, I said a minute ago that I'm not anti-development per se, but it has to be well thought out, and the well thought out is, um, excuse me, it's not just a function of what the development looks like, but where it's situated. So if I'd been on council for the past 4 years, and the same type of development that is either underway or shortly to be underway in Thornhill, we're in the east end of the city, we're in an underdeveloped end of the city, well then kudos, wonderful, thank you developers for coming in. That's when you want to entice developers to come in and help create a new community. Thornhill is an established, mature community. It's, as I said, historically the oldest part of Markham, and the type of development from just a physical infrastructure, it's trying to sometimes fit I think developers are okay with trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, as long as they can force it in and make some money. But the problem is that the community that exists there right now, we are the ones that suffer accordingly. So when I talk about moving about, when you've got, I said Bayview is the second busiest artery in York region right now, let alone let alone with three major developments, and then there's the super development that goes beyond these five, which is the Langstaff Gateway, which is going to be the second largest development in all of Markham. And that's been planned in the planning for several decades already, but from Yonge Street all the way over to Bayview. So we put that in a whole different strata. But the three major projects that I'm talking about, again, major projects, we're not talking about a small little infill project, a developer that's done a land assembly, half a dozen or so houses, and putting in a small little townhouse complex. We're talking about upwards of 5,000 units in a 400, 500 meter area that already is congested. The impact isn't just on the roads, the impact is on facilities. So not only is Thornhill the oldest part of Markham, and part of that is very good, it's got rich, wonderful history. We cherish our heritage neighborhoods in Thornhill. But we've also got some of the oldest infrastructure, not some of, we've got the oldest infrastructure, both underground, the non-sexy things like stormwater, like sewage, we've above ground like power utility grids, and amenities. The Thornhill Community Center is almost 50 years old. Buy a house in the 14th and McCowan area, and you're walking into a brand new community center, 2-3 years old. It still has the new car smell to it, so to speak. But residents in Thornhill, we're not paying any our property tax rate isn't any less. The assessed value on Thornhill homes on an average basis is the highest in Markham. So the value for dollar, I'm not sure is really there anymore, because we have old facilities, we have old amenities, same thing with our parks. A new park today in a new part of the city, new part of any city, quite frankly, has a whole new philosophy that's put to it, a whole new design elements that are put to it. You get a new park piece of equipment when something is rusted out now in Thornhill. And I think it's a matter of equity. I mean, I said this 8 years ago when I was on council to the mayor, that again, we're paying the same tax rate, probably higher taxes, property taxes in general, because of the assessed value. Yet what we're getting in return isn't an above standard return on that investment. We're getting the second busiest artery, Bayview. We're getting overdevelopment. That's in the past 4 years that's been approved. We're getting a subway, much needed, but that's diverging through a local community that makes no sense. Uh, and development for this, as if developers are treating this as a clean slate, like you would a new area of the city. And it just, honestly, it boggles my mind how Thornhill is being treated, uh, quite unfairly, to be honest. Um, and I think at the expense of the residents that live here now.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point because essentially you're not talking about Thornhill, and I'm sorry about the air quotes. You're talking about people and how people live. And you mentioned quality of life, which is really important. Um, I guess progress has to be measured, right? That's where our conversation's going here, where you need to measure progress and understand the impact that progress can make. Blind progress may not be progress by your definition of what I just heard. So is this a fait accompli, or do you have to be voted, and do you have to chase this thing on behalf of the people who feel the same as you in your community?
Well, uh, I agree with you about blind progress. First of all, because um, when you talk about, or when we as a community talk about um, putting in a subway line up Yonge Street, that's been called for decades, and kudos to the federal and provincial levels of government for finally getting together. When I was on council, I called for a national transit strategy, especially when you're talking about uh, Yonge Street as arguably the most commercial street in Canada. Um, so the money is there and that's good, but why you get to Royal Orchard and Yonge and decide you're going to go through the local community is a source of huge frustration. But when you talk about adding such major development right off the bat, you're taxing a system that from day one, instead of being able to slowly grow with the community, you're shoving such demand immediately. And the developers look at it and say, well, okay, the only way we can get away with um, even applying for an 80-story tower is because there's going to be transit right there. So you're going to tax the full demand of that subway from day one. That to me doesn't make sense. That to me isn't again fair to the local community. So residents that have lived there, both on the Vaughan and on the Markham side of Thornhill, that have been fighting for a Yonge Finch subway extension for years, now we're going to have to fight to get on that train from day one, because the volume of people that are going to live in those new towers are going to tax the system right off the bat. You can't say, I can't believe that Metrolinx would have statistics that say there's going to be excess capacity. That is a major intensification project that's being contemplated for the beginning or end of the line, depending on which direction you're going, north or south on the subway. Um, and your other question, forgive me, where we went for their quality of life, it all ties into every aspect of our life. Whether it is work, play, whether it's going to the park, what type of amenities the city has. When I go door to door right now, the example that I use with a lot of residents is you go out for a nice evening's dinner. And if you go to a nice restaurant, and if the service has been good, if the food has been good, if the ambiance is there, you don't mind if it's a little bit of an expensive bill. But if you go in, you're sitting next to the kitchen and the waiter or waitress hasn't been that attentive and the food was subpar, then getting the expensive bill annoys you. Well, once upon a time, I would have said that I think that bill is sort of like your property tax bill. And I would have thought we get a lot of value in Thornhill. I'm not sure of that anymore. In fact, I don't believe that's necessarily the case. When you foist, this isn't. You talked about progress a minute ago. Well, again, progress you think of with newer areas where you're trying to build something new. Markham's been built up. Sorry, the Thornhill portion of Markham has been built up over decades. Buy a house in a newer area of the city, and your roads aren't going to be torn up to put in a new stormwater system. In Thornhill, we had 20 years ago major flooding. It's a floodplain, and we have the oldest infrastructure underground. Stormwater pipes are measured, the dimension of them is measured in the theoretical capacity to handle the worst storm in 2 years, 5 years, and then it
In a
starts
hundred years.
in
In a
100.
hundred years.
So when I was on council, I got $10 million worth of stable funding for Thornhill Homes to have the stormwater system upgraded. We did it in a phased approach over 8 years so that there wouldn't be what I called at the time a construction war zone doing major projects all at the same time. But again, we've had to bear the brunt of having that construction done, a needed work because the system was old and couldn't handle the demands of the community. But again, buy a house in a newer area, and you're not going to have to put up with that because that 100-year size is standard. The power utility grids above ground. Well, when the grids were laid out decades ago, and I'm no engineering or electricity specialist by any means, uh, but my understanding is they were smaller grids that hooked up a smaller number of houses. Well, during the ice storm 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, and I remember it very well because my street or many parts of Thornhill took a full 6 days to get their electricity back. Why? Because the same amount of time that a power stream crew was dedicating in Thornhill, might hook up 500 homes, but in a newer area of the city that the grids today would attach to 1,500, 2,000 homes. Well, you're servicing that many more people. It's no fault of anybody. That was what was done in the day decades ago when the electricity grids were laid out. But it is a fact of life for people living in Thornhill. Um, we have old community centers, we have old parks, and we're paying the full freight in our taxes. Nobody's giving any type of rebate to Thornhill because everything is old. So it's an already overburdened, overstrained system. Even if you just take a look at, forget the age of the community center, a community center that the city slaps a coat of paint on every few years and thinks that makes it newer or newish. You get to a certain point and that just doesn't cut it because new community center, there's a difference between new and a little bit of refurbishment that makes it look a little bit nicer. But it was built decades ago to handle the size of a growing community at that time. And now, within walking distance of the community, the community center serves all of Thornhill, but within walking distance of it, you're going to have an influx of individuals that are going to tax the capacity of that community center, of that library from day one. From day one. That library, which is used by students, which is used by residents, is busy pre-COVID, is busy already. And now you're putting in 5,000 new units. more or less in the area. Uh, Again, I go back to quality of life.
I hear you, and I have an analogy. You can borrow it. You can borrow it at no charge. It'll be free. It's the same as saying, enlarging a restaurant, improving the quality of the food, adding more tables, but removing the parking lot.
There you go.
Right? I mean, I get what you're
There you
saying,
go.
because at the end of the day, there's a balance that has to remain, and this is why it's important for us as voters and taxpayers and businesses to understand, people who are campaigning and want to be a part of government. In a way, you almost have to see a problem before it arrives. And somehow, how difficult is it for someone who wants to be a counselor and sees something coming down the road when you're going door to door? What are some of the challenges in helping people to understand? Is it a challenge? Do people understand readily? Is it something you have to figure out how to make sure they understand? Does it take a lot of time? Because I'm sure you're going to wear out a few sets of shoes, as I've heard you say, talking to residents. What are some of the challenges when we talk about something like this, because it's not in their face right now? They're not walking down the street in a crowded street. You're basically predicting this is going to happen. So the reality of it, how do you get it inside the heads of the residents and the businesses?
Normally, I would agree with you. In this case, it resonates with people immediately. Immediately. Uh, as far as wearing out shoes, my feet are killing me. It's been a joy getting out
I'm
doing the door to
you.
door.
Sorry.
Actually, I love it. Uh, Especially having been a counselor before, you meet a lot of people that you remember or that remember you, and you exchange some memories and people. It's been great seeing people. And some friendly faces, and the response at the door has been great. But this resonates with people. They don't need people are current on the issues. They may not know the specifics of how many units is being planned for Shoaldice or how many units is being planned for the community center, but part of Royal Orchard at the Bayview end has been just recently torn up for repairs and work as part of the Tridel development. The residents in that area are fully abreast of everything that's been happening. The residents in the Royal Orchard and Young area, I haven't encountered a single homeowner that isn't aware of the subway route, what the traffic congestion is going to be like during construction, aware of the development proposal for Food Basics Plaza. So no, you mentioned development in the first couple of sentences, and people, they're there. They're
You're
there.
you're fortunate. Then your community's fortunate. At least the leadership and government there is transparent enough to give you enough leeway or lead
Well,
way to know what's coming down the road. Right? It's not being dropped on
well,
the residents. You have time to deal with it, and as a
you,
counselor, you're happy about that.
well, you can't. These are things you can't hide. Um, you, these are things you can't hide. These are proposals. Sorry, these aren't proposals. These are things that have been approved over the past 4 years. There's the signage goes up. There'll be a public meeting. Residents have protested. Residents protested 4 years ago before the last election against the Tridel development, and it got approved, notwithstanding the community's disagreement. Uh, the Ford government, through Metrolinx, is pushing through a route for the subway extension that uh, in this maybe you can make sense of this, Frank. I can't. Metrolinx says that from an engineering point of view, it makes best sense to diverge through the local Royal Orchard Baythorn community, going under houses, snaking through the streets there to meet up with the GO station, the Langstaff GO station. In all the subway system as exists today, from Yonge and Finch down to Front Street, they encountered no such engineering difficulty, despite the different terrain up and down through that distance. But at Royal Orchard in Yonge, they encountered such an impediment that it doesn't make sense to go straight north the a few another kilometer or two up to Highway 7, but instead inconvenience the local residents. It isn't just a question of transparency, because you can't hide development proposals. There's bylaws on the books and for uh, how uh, how a proposal from a planning point of view has to go ahead. I can't speak of um, what level of engagement the local councillor has had with the community. When I was on council, I inherited a huge development proposal for the Shops on Steeles Plaza at Don Mills and Steeles. The developer wanted to put up 8 condominium towers, 32 stories each. And maybe it was because I was still green in the gills, but we tried some things that were uh, a little unusual in terms of community engagement, in terms of transparency. I ensured that the Ratepayer Association, which was very, very actively involved, the German Mills Ratepayers, had a behind the scenes sneak preview, so to speak, with the city's lawyers, what an OMB appeal would look like, and went around the room. We had a boardroom at the Civic Center. We had the city's outside legal counsel. We had our commissioner of planning, and to a person, I said, ask every single question you want, because when you make a decision, whether you want me to continue to fight on your behalf, or whether you want to compromise, whether you want to put forward a number of your own. Um, I want you to have the full, not just the politics of it, but to know matter of factly from the lawyers and the planners what are the strengths and weaknesses of our case. Uh, my way of engaging every counselor's way of engaging with their community might be different. Mine is to be as open and transparent as possible, give people, warts and all, as much information as is available. And at the end of the day, whether it's me as their representative or whether it's staff, uh, we work for the community. And the community, to be able to make an informed decision, needs as much information as is available out there. The unfortunate thing is that when the community expresses itself, and still things happen against the community's wish, it's um, it's frustrating, to put it mildly.
Absolutely. You asked me about Metrolinx and what's my opinion. I will tell you that before I moved to where I am in Wasaga now, I used to live just north of Dufferin and Eglinton off Dufferin. And they've been working on Metrolinx there. It seems like forever. I don't remember when they weren't there. And I've moved here, and I go to a lot of football games. Yes, CFL football. I go to a lot of football games at the X. Well, not at the XC. I call that's how old I am, at BMO Field, and I drive through that area because I take the 400 and Black Creek Drive, and it's still under construction. So as far as making sense of Metrolinx and making sense of those kinds of plans, unfortunately, I'm one of the people that can say, when does it end? And you talk about, that's the other issue that I think you as a counselor are going to be probably talking on behalf of the residents, is how long is it going to be an inconvenience to the community? You're talking about after it's all done, there's going to be a convenience. I can't imagine the inconvenience that you'll be dealing with as it's being done.
So I say to people right now, figure plus or minus, if there isn't a change now, if there isn't at the very least, a pause on development. Now, one of the projects, the Tridel development at the back end of the ladies golf course at Bayview and Royal Orchard, they've already got a shovel in the ground, a few shovels in the ground, and it's underway. But unless there is some change, I see 10 years worth of uh, major project development from one end of Thornhill to the other. And so you live on one of the side streets off of Royal Orchard. Well, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. When you want to get out and say, I got to go to grocery shopping, I can go to Food Basics at Young Street, I can go to Food Basics at Bayview. But either way, I got traffic just to get there. And that's not the type of community that's not the type of experience that residents in an established community should expect. If you're moving into a new development, that the roads are just being paved, the services are just being put in, and that there's a trade-off. You're going to be sometimes moving into a dust bowl because it could be a brand new development where literally they're just paving the road, putting the roads down, but you're getting everything brand spanking new. You don't expect a whole swath of services from day one, but that's not the case here. And we shouldn't be in a position, residents in Thornhill shouldn't be in a position where they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, which way. The only way you can go not facing traffic on Bayview during the day is north. So if you're heading north, you're going to have a little bit less traffic than otherwise. But on every other street, to encounter either construction headaches or just the normal quote unquote normal gridlock that exists today, let alone once all of these units are in place. The students that are using the community center, I mentioned it before, but whether it's the students or whether it's adults that are using it, it's a busy place already. Is there a commitment by council that either they're going to take development charge tax dollars or otherwise to build a new community center, to put an add-on to this community center? Not that I've heard of. So once, like you mentioned, once all of these developments are on stream, the demands on the system as is are going to be enormous. And I think that we don't have the capacity from an infrastructure point of view. And infrastructure is, to me, is an all-encompassing. It's the ugly underground stuff. It's the above ground power stuff. It's the park amenities. It's the facilities that we've got. And I'm saying to myself, okay, we're at that restaurant and we've got this expensive bill, but they put us next to the kitchen, and the waiter's not having a great night, and the chef's experimenting with something that isn't right either.
Yeah, I hear you. When you talk about provincial and federal assistance, where the financial, some of the costs can be, helped with provincial and federal money. Green is a color that you have to pay. You have to not concern yourself with, but consider whenever doing any planning. Green can be expensive initially. It's a subject that's getting stronger and stronger as time goes on. How do you feel about green construction and tying it? And because now with funds, you can't get funds unless you do that federally or provincially.
That's an excellent question. I remember the first time I went door to door, I guess it's 12 years ago. I talked to residents about certain green initiatives that were being considered at the time, and there were some people that were skeptical, and it's going to be too costly, resisting a lot of the ideas. And I said, and I couldn't tell you specifically what specific ideas they were at the time. But I said, at first they will be costly. Then this new industry will realize there's a demand for it. It will become the way we do things. It will become more cost effective, and we as a society will be better for it. Markham has a wonderful sustainability department. Um, I think that green initiatives are great. Uh, I think that whether it's there from a planning point of view, we promote a gold a lead standard for buildings. We now look at zero waste initiatives. So they're becoming more the norm, as it should be, than some far-fetched fetched idea that there's somebody out there on the fringe trying to do something. I remember the first developer that came and made a presentation to Markham Council about uh, a, uh, uh, a zero waste building from a planning point of view that he was building, and he was out there on the fringe. This is, let's say, 11 years ago. He was the only one that was pushing that type of commitment for a commercial property. That isn't the case anymore. And kudos to all of those first initiators that are willing to make the commitment, the investment. They're sometimes on the cusp, the leading edge of things.
Sure.
And but then it becomes. But if somebody came around today and said, "I'm going to be building a zero waste building," not that it's the norm yet, but it wouldn't be far. It wouldn't be far fetched. We were. I remember the presentation this fellow brought in. I don't want to give away the name of the developer, but he had staff bring in a massive model of the commercial building and some of the sundry buildings into our committee room, and he scoffed at the notion of gold, silver, lead standards, which were the sort of the benchmarks in the day 11 years ago for planning. This is zero waste. Don't even talk to me about gold. And we were spellbound listening to him. Not to say that council today might not be as equally spellbound if somebody came forward with something similar. But as the years go by, it becomes more commonplace, and that's good. And
not just commonplace, it becomes more standard.
Sure.
Because there's two words that, well, there's the one word you used, initiative. That isn't definitive. An initiative is not it's an open-ended to a degree. And the challenge of new buildings is that they have to be retrofittable, right? And so that speaks to, there's a little bit of a leap of faith that people have to make, which might be the disconnect.
Absolutely. So, and that's why I tip my hat to those, whether it's in the development industry or otherwise, that have that faith when they're out there as outliers, but they're not any longer. Right now, today, if somebody came forward and said, "I've got a zero waste building or a zero waste development that I'm proposing," it is becoming the norm, slowly but surely. But once upon a time, again, we were spellbound because how are you doing this? We haven't heard, we hear about the guys that want to do the gold standard, and we tip our hats to them. This is really, you're doing something that's really, and it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of commitment, and I will, I will say the developer. It was a fellow by the name of Dave De Silva, and he was committed. The notion that somebody is a developer and can't be committed to the environment and to sustainability issues is just plain ridiculous. They are people too. They live on this planet. They share the same resources, and and it but it takes a commitment to do things differently. And there are some in every industry that are willing to go out on a limb sooner than others. But then the others will realize there's a market there, and there's a demand for that type of building or this type of product, or whatever the case may be, and that it isn't as much of a risk as they had in their head to begin with.
That's why it's so important, and I've learned a little bit as I move along in this world of politics, where you yourself depend. There's a symbiosis required between you and the level of the employees that work for the government as opposed to get elected, the clerks and such, that set the table for you to make your decisions. So in effect, they're the ones that have to be driven to accept these kinds of new principles, and they also have to understand, you know, them really well. And it's hard to do something that's new. But as you said, we're talking about initiatives that began, a couple of decades ago. I mean, a couple of decades ago, people were frightened. I was in construction building buildings and back then, and they told us, okay, the LEAD program was when it first came out, and they said to me, well, Frank, you're going to have a bin for this, a bin for that, a bin for this, a bin for that. Wait, hang on a second. We used to have one bin and we'd have the guy come in and take everything out. Now you got to have 3, 4 bins. And now I've been out of construction for a wee bit of a time. Now what you're telling me is they're not having a whole, but now what they're doing is you're going to figure out a way not to use any bins. So it is a challenge. It's difficult at best.
So I'll just add two quick things. One is Mark, at least when I was on council, Markham's sustainability department, probably on average, it wasn't a huge department, but on average, probably had the lowest age of average age of staff, and these were young recent graduates, even including the head of the department, Graham Seaman, who wasn't an old fogey like myself, but all people who were recent graduates whose thinking on sustainability were such that if a developer, if any business person were coming to Markham and wanted to do something with the city, they had the understanding of what can be done in today's environment. And the second thing is, we had an initiative to move away from dark garbage bags in Markham,
Right.
to increase the amount, or to reduce the amount that was being sent to landfill. We went to clear garbage bags with the notion that the amount that you could now, as a bylaw in Markham, put into garbage that went to landfill was visible to everybody. And so you had to be more conscious of what was organic or what was recyclable. Was there some resistance at the outset? Sure. But as there is with many of the things that we've talked about with the planning and LEAD or the zero waste, but once it gets inculcated into the system of people, into how you where you have the blue bins within your house, it becomes easy.
Second nature. It becomes second nature through habit.
Second nature. It just becomes easy.
Repetitive stuff tends to be like that. I don't want to miss any of the topics you'd like to talk about. I know one that you really that really gets you going, and we only have about 10 minutes left, is the new powers that the provincial premier is handing to the mayors. I think that's one of your favorite topics, no?
Well, yes and no. There's the thing that I learned. The thing that I learned being on council is that it really doesn't matter what I hate the phrase actually. What my favorite issue is that there's no um, that all issues are important to any particular individual, or sorry, what's important to one individual uh, is what's key, and whether it's the number one thing on my agenda or not is irrelevant, because if somebody is concerned about speeding on Romfield Circuit, which I've been on the past couple of nights, and that's what they're talking about in concert with development, then that's what's important. If they're talking about, if somebody's concerned about potholes, that's important. If they're talking about, if they're a senior and they've got to deal with the windrow snow bank that gets piled up by the snow plows, that's what's important. Um, but you asked about the new powers to mayors. Well, so the legislation doesn't affect Markham currently.
Current.
It's directed at, or it's being given to two of our big cities, Toronto and Ottawa. I think that Markham doesn't follow far too behind in being classified as a big city. Um, and I'm of two minds. I mean, on the one hand, yes, a mayor is elected citywide, but I think that there one has to be cognizant of those issues that are citywide issues versus the ones that are strictly based on a particular ward or affect a particular ward. When I think back to when I was on council, I can think of a couple of issues in particular where uh, where the mayor and I disagreed strongly, respectfully, but strongly on proposals that he had or ideas that he had for a couple of initiatives in Thornhill that I felt strongly against. And I wonder if a Markham mayor, I don't want to make it particular to that individual, to Frank Scarpitti, but if any mayor felt differently and just imposed his or her will. Um, if it's a citywide initiative, maybe the thinking, maybe the way it's structured has to be a little bit differently. But again, I just have in the back of my mind uh, a proposal that the mayor had at the time for a pilot project on what used to be a landfill and now is a beautiful meadow, the German Mills Meadow and Natural Habitat. I won. The mayor and I squared off. We felt very differently on whether a pilot project that he had in mind should go ahead. I sided with the residents. I thought it did not make sense. Would a would a mayor with those types of powers have overridden
Oh,
Howard Shore's vote and me convincing enough of my colleagues to vote in favor of my proposal? Um, I don't know. Uh, we talked earlier about the stormwater upgrades. Mayor Scarpitti had, at least initially, a different idea than I did in terms of funding. He supported the notion of a local improvement charge, essentially a tax on just that local community. I thought stormwater upgrades should be treated just like any other infrastructure work, the paving of a road, fixing of a sidewalk, and be a citywide expense. Would a mayor with those types of powers just said, okay, here's by decree um, my decision. So that's where I'm torn.
you're. I've talked to a few counselors in a few different places, and the question comes up is why did the residents vote me in then if I don't have any say in what we're doing? Like, what's the point of voting in a counselor if a counselor doesn't take part in the conversation? And there's nothing that speaks to municipal politics more than the collective. It's not an individual. It can't be because every community and even wards, like here where I live, there's no ward. We vote for 5 council people, right? And they're voted to by or by everyone, right? Which I understand. There's even some talk here that the ward system, for the very reason that you're speaking to.
Keep in mind, you, even as a counselor, the way it exists right now, you have to make a credible argument to convince enough of your colleagues to support your position one way or the other. And I think that makes good sense. If I can't convince at least six other people to join me on whatever the initiative is, uh, well, then it deserves to fail.
And if a leader can point to one area in a larger community and say, okay, you're going to take on the burden of something, and those people don't have a strong voice on their side, it can lead, in my opinion, it could lead to some victimization because, if it's a minority that's being, picked on, the majority is going to go, well, it's not my problem. It's everyone's problem tomorrow. It's my problem today. And that's why, that's how I've been. That's what I've heard from council people that I've spoken to, that, there shouldn't be a super mayor. But that's something, uh, that
We
will
can
happen,
talk about it another time.
right? It's not on me. You're going to have to do that. Only way I can do anything about it is, it depends how I'm asked to vote. That's that's all. So that's why, voting has consequences. People have to vote. You're trying to get back into Markham Council. I congratulate you on the efforts where you've succeeded in the past. I thank you for that. That beautiful work that you've done. Nowadays it seems politicians now, not only do they have to think, make decisions, they got to wear flak jackets today. It's getting ridiculous. Politics is becoming dangerous, and I thank you for your service.
My pleasure. Thank you for your time today, Frank.
My pleasure. Of course, when you vote, folks, as I like to say, I know that it's hard to vote. People find it difficult to vote, but it's not just a right; it's a responsibility. So. He's Howard Shore, running for the municipal election in Markham as councillor. I'm Frank Stanishi. Thank you for watching Open Forum. Candid, frank, and live, of course, as always. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Thanks for watching, everybody. Really appreciate you being here.